Hello and welcome to the Flourish Conference. My name's Aaron Jarden, and the talk that I'm giving this afternoon is called A Useful Mixed Bag of Wellbeing Resources. And that's literally what it is. It is a mixed bag in many ways. What I aim to do is cover one skill, one framework, one idea, one insight, one research finding, one tip for practice, and one common mistake I see regularly being made. So amongst this kind of mixed bag, I hope there's some value in this talk for you. And that will flow into your thoughts around how you practice and so forth. So just to give you an overview of what these things are. So we're going to start with a skill, which I call the Geelong 3 breaths technique. The framework I'm going to cover is one that I developed called Me, We, Us. The idea is about the power of questioning. The insight is about the negative impacts of positive change and how to manage those. The research finding is about what wellbeing means to adolescents. The tip is really to think about who would like well-being and when, and how that is ideally delivered. And the mistake that I see quite often is around assessment and evaluation, and just really how important it is to get that right. And then lastly, one unrelated question is I'd like to end by challenge you to think of a question to ask me when we connect live, either about some of the material I covered today, or it might be just something else in general, and that's completely fine. So let's get right into it. The first is the skill. So this is a skill that I pinched off Justin Robinson at Geelong Grammar School, and it's one that I've had a lot of success with, and I get a lot of positive feedback from. And the way I think this skill is so valuable and works is for two reasons really. First, it's very portable, so it's a skill that you can use while you're in the car and you're feeling a bit frustrated by getting 10 red lights in a row, or you're sitting outside for a job interview. You can tap into this skill, so it's a very portable skill. And probably the second reason is it draws on three different, essentially literature bases, which we know relate to well-being, and puts them all together. So it's essentially synergizes and puts some evidence into one particular skill. The skill's quite easy. All it involves is taking 3 deep breaths. So I'll just describe it first, and then I'd like you to invite you to have a go at it. So for the first breath, you take a deep breath in, fill your lungs, breathe in through your nose. And then as you breathe out through your mouth, just notice your physical body and just relax any points of pain or tension. So you just breathe out slowly, just relaxing your physical body. For the second breath, breathe in exactly the same way, very deep breaths through your nose, fill your lungs. Then as you breathe out now, think about what are you grateful for right in this very moment. So not in the past, not in the future, but it can be something that you're grateful that's big or small, but say to yourself in your mind, right now I'm grateful for, and at least say one thing. And then the third breath out, you take a deep breath in, and then as you breathe out, this is about putting your mind into an intentional stance or an intentional state for the upcoming however long. So in this example for this talk, so you might say to yourself in your mind, my intention right now is to be curious or open-minded or critical, or whatever state that you want to approach the next period of time. So we know that there's a strong link between your attention and well-being, your attentional state. So this is putting your attentional state into that to maximize well-being. So here we've got a technique which capitalizes on relaxing your physical body, reduces stress. Gratefulness, we know there's a huge amount of literature linking gratefulness and gratitude to invoke positive emotions. And we've got this idea of intention and what we focus on impacting our well-being. So I'd just like to pause for a minute now and just invite you to take 3 deep breaths in that very controlled way. So again, just to go over them, relax your body. What are you grateful for right now? And my intention right now is to be such and such. So I'd like to just invite you to pause and have a go at this technique now. Okay, that should have been long enough. Otherwise, I have a few concerns, but hopefully that's a skill that you'll try a few more times, kick the tires of it, see if it works for you. And like I say, I've had a lot of really positive feedback. A lot of teachers, for example, use it at the start of a class to get their students sort of a bit more centered and focused. Now, one framework that could be useful. So this one I call Me, We, and Us. And this came out of my practice experience many years ago, where I used to turn up to large organizations and talk to HR managers or CEOs with the framework on the right there, the conceptual overview, which as you can see is very detailed and comes out of a project in the UK called the Foresight Project. And as soon as whoever it was, the HR manager saw this, I could literally see the eyes rolling in the back of their head. they really just didn't have the capacity or time to get into the detail of work wellbeing models and things like that. They had other priorities. So even getting wellbeing in the door was a challenge, but stumping up with a very complex and detailed model was a bit of a hindrance to actually getting things going. So I sat back and thought about it and thought, it's really the language here that's not so helpful. So the way that I'd then explain it the next time around would say, well, there's a bunch of things that your employees can do, and I call that the me level. So they can, download a mindfulness program, they can do a strengths program. There's a whole lot of activities that they can do on their own back, so to speak, but it may require a little bit of minimal resourcing. So they're at the individual level, and I call that the me level. Then there's the we level, and by that I mean it's the relationship between the employee and their manager, and there's a bunch of activities there. A really popular one at the moment is called job crafting. But then there's also the relationship between the employee and the rest of their team. So it's really a relational level, but it's with the employee and who they know and work with in the work environment. And then there's the us level. So the us, I mean the whole of the organization. And at that level, it's things like having a wellbeing framework, resourcing wellbeing programs and wellbeing. And there are approaches like appreciative inquiry, which touch the whole of the organization. So you can see these quite nice 3 levels here, me, we, and us. And the beauty of this model is its simplicity. So anyone from frontline staff to the CEO can understand this model really quickly and really easily. And where it aligns is, or at least where I see it align, is that when I look at case studies of organizations that have cultivated a culture of well-being, but also sustained it over time, what they're actually doing well is intervening at all 3 of these levels. So there's no real guidance yet in the literature about where do you start. Does it need to be employee driven, bottom up, or does it come from the CEO down? I've seen it work both ways. So the question of where do you start is really relevant to and different for every organization. But the key point here is, if you really want to create a system and a culture of wellbeing in an organization, such as a school or any organization, you've really got to start thinking about targeting systems and different levels of the system. And this me, we, us framework can be really useful for that. And there's a little reference down the bottom there where you can read more about it if you'd like. Next, one idea. And this is an idea that's not really talked too much, especially in the realms of positive psychology debate and discourse. And that's really about the power of questions per se. So I really like the quote by Mr. Miyagi in The Karate Kid, where he said, the answer's not important unless you ask the right question first. And I think of wellbeing science a lot along these lines, that really we could do better by actually focusing on the questions that we ask. A really good example here is what does a great day at work look like? In many cases, I've been in front of a large group of employees for the first time. I always start with that question, and almost every time, stunned silence. It's not a question that people really consider that often, but it's a vital question. Unless you, at an individual level and as a collective level, have a vision of what a great day at work looks like in the wellbeing stakes, it's really hard to build skills to plan for that. So it's really a foundational question. And in fact, if you take just one thing away from this talk today that I'm giving, if you could think about this question and think about how this question relates to your colleagues, what would a great day be for them, and to students, what would a great day look like for them, that will be a huge, huge success from my mind anyway. But there's a whole bunch of other questions to focus your intent in creating a wellbeing and flourishing environment. So things like what's right in this environment, what's good, what works, what's not working, what should I focus on, how do I accept myself, what are my greatest strengths and competencies, and I've listed a few more there. But the idea here is really, it doesn't come with thinking about a wellbeing program or a skill or a strength or things like that. It actually comes back down to a question. So getting clear about what kind of question you're asking and what kind of questions are valuable in your environment, I think is an idea worth spreading, as the TED saying goes. Next one, insight. So this is the insight that I see a lot, but I don't think people fully realize, and that's that all change is stressful. So we certainly know that negative change is stressful. So restructuring, dealing with COVID, all sorts of things that about buffering ill-being, that's certainly stressful. But even positive change can be stressful. We see in the research literature, for example, the stressful effects of getting married, of winning the lotto. Things that you think would be really positive can actually be stressful. So the idea here is actually all change is stressful to some degree, But even then, the follow-on from this is that actually some of that stress is good for us. It helps us perform. I put up there a model of eustress, which is this idea of a positive stress. So that some stress actually motivates our performance. Obviously, when that stress becomes too much and too overwhelming, and it's coupled with our interpretation of that stress, which really provides the kicker and the negative impacts, then it can lead to distress and be really bad for our health and our well-being. So it's really just thinking that even if you're putting in place positive change, that it is going to have some negative stressful impact. So that's just one insight I've observed that's worth thinking about. The next is one research finding. So here I draw on a recent article that I completed with colleagues in New Zealand, where we looked at what adolescents conceptualised well-being to be. And we compared that with what other samples of adults that we'd already researched, what they thought the notion of well-being was, and also what the academic literature and the academics thought well-being was, and tried to figure out some differences. And in this research, we clearly found that for adolescents, key to their conception of well-being was having fun, feeling safe, and being kind and helpful. Those were really central components. So they're not central components of models like PERMA and things like that, but they are really important when you ask adolescents to think about well-being. So we're starting to see differences in models of well-being by age. And likewise, when we go down to younger kids, we see things like having a pet as being very important to their well-being. When we asked them about what promotes their well-being, we also found some things that you think are pretty stable in the well-being literature, mostly around connections and relationships. So it was having positive family relationships and friendships, but also they identified physical activity and sport as pathways to improve their well-being. So here's an article that you might want to read more about that contextualize how well-being is a little bit different for school students compared to teaching staff, for example. Now, one tip. This tip would be to think about receptivity to well-being. We don't have any measures of this as yet, but from my experience of delivering wellbeing programs in large organisations, I find roughly that about a third of people, they just can't wait for a wellbeing program. They've been exposed to all sorts of other programs in the past, mental health programs, leadership programs, all sorts of things. But when you knock on the door and offer them a wellbeing program, they literally can't wait to engage with it. Then you see about another third of people that once it starts and they see and hear about people having good experiences, then they'll buy in and participate in the program. So they're not there right at the start, but they will come on board if the value proposition is right. And then you have this really hard to reach third at the end, the hard basket I've called, so to speak. And these are people that have had really poor experiences of personal development in their work environment in the past. They may not feel like they belong to the organisation. They're disengaging. They're just turning up to get a paycheck, so to speak. They're really time poor, so they might be really stretched. But for a lot of them, it's really just the timing's not right. So if a lot of these obstacles were overcome, they would actually participate. They just don't want to participate right now. So when I'm talking about receptivity wellbeing, I'd say think about if there's a way that you can gain some insight into who might benefit most from a wellbeing program or wellbeing intervention, and not necessarily assume that it will be everyone right now, but how can you have a staggered approach to deliver and utilize your resources in a more strategic way. So again, that's a big challenge. No one's really cracked it, but I'm saying it's an important part of where the field's going forward and the technology that's being developed at the moment. So that's just a tip to think about. And lastly, one common mistake, and that's I see really poor evaluation and assessment of wellbeing when it's rolled out in organisations and schools. And that's really to the detriment of the quality of the program and the impacts that it could have. So I really say and encourage, firstly, to take pre and post assessment measures, not just either pre or post, but so that you can gauge change over time. And secondly, not just to assess wellbeing outcomes per se. So for example, as a result of the program, did the staff become happier or were they more satisfied at work? But actually unpick the drivers of what's changing wellbeing. So not just the global outcomes or what as a researcher we call a dependent variable, but also the independent variables or the mechanisms of change. Do assessments around that. Do they feel like they've got stronger meaning at work, or they're using their strengths more, or they feel more motivation or valued? If you're also tracking change in these metrics, then you can understand how the wellbeing program or whatever activity you're doing is working or not, and that will help you pivot to change going forward. So it's not just understanding whether the program worked, it's understanding how it worked. That's a more ideal evaluation approach. But nonetheless, any kind of assessment and evaluation that's implemented appropriately will help you utilize your resources better, measure the impact and justify it to your key stakeholders, and actually do better to everyone involved. So I really encourage those that are applying wellbeing science and positive psychology to really think properly about wellbeing assessment and evaluation, and to gain some consultation and from those with this expertise if they're not really in that position to do so. So to end it there today, I hope there was something of value in what I covered. And I'd really encourage you to challenge me with a question. It can be anything at all across the whole field of wellbeing science. It doesn't necessarily have to be around some of the topics that I've covered today, but I'd love to be challenged with questions. So get a question ready for when we connected live, and hopefully I'll say something reasonably useful about it. And I'd just like to end also with my favorite quote of all time, and that's by Ralph Emerson, and that's, "Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm." So if you're watching this video and you're partaking in this conference, you're at the front line of helping create flourishing environments. So we really need you. We need more people like you, but we also need people that are really enthusiastic, because we really are about achieving greatness here and pivoting and adapting this field. So thank you for listening. Go well, and I look forward to connecting with you on the day of the conference.